Welcome to the third episode in a Legendarium series about vampires through the ages. In Part 3, Medieval Monsters, we will talk about how the people of the Middle Ages saw vampires. Even after the fall of Rome and the ascent of Christianity, a belief in vampires persisted. People experienced death very differently in medieval Europe. People opened stalls and did business in cemeteries, used bones as decorative objects, and believed in the literal truth of the undead. Peasant farmers often believed that someone in a grave might not be as dead as they appear. In times of plague, peasants searched cemeteries for possible vampires. Since the peasants believed that vampires could not touch iron, they drove iron nails into the bodies of suspected vampires or placed iron objects across the corpse. This included the less gruesome method of placing iron bars upon the vampire's tomb, which would supposedly keep the creature from getting out of their grave when they awoke. In the Czech town of Selakovic, there is an 11th century graveyard which contains 14 skeletons thought to have been considered vampires by people at the time. They either had their heads cut off, their hands and legs bound, metal spikes driven through their bodies, or stones placed on their tombs. Most of the suspected vampires tended to be young men and women and seem to have died around the same time as one another. Did they die of some epidemic and the survivors took precautions in the fear that the dead would revive? Or could there have been some hysteria in this small town which resulted in these young people being murdered? Of course, belief in vampires spread across the whole of Europe. Some medieval Icelandic sagas feature Draugr. These vampire-like creatures possessed immense strength and magical powers like shape-shifting, weather control, and seeing into the future. They lived in their barrows, greedily guarding the treasures within. Draugr are bitterly jealous of the living, and anyone who passes a Draugr's barrow can be driven mad by its overwhelming hate. And at night they leave their barrows, transforming into an ethereal mist to pass over walls, so they can torment the living and slaughter domestic animals. Possible vampires also occurred in early medieval England. For example, William of Newburgh, writing in 1198 AD, collected a series of anecdotes about walking corpses which match Eastern European folk ideas about vampires. His creatures, which he called revenants, are corpses bloated by gases and blood-like fluid. Bloated corpses are often associated with outbreaks of the plague, showing that medieval people closely connected epidemic disease and vampires. In one such story, which unfolded around Anantis Castle, a Yorkshire man died after a wretched and misspent life. When he began walking the earth after rising from his grave, the stench poisoned the air wherever he went. Howling hounds sent by Satan always pursued him, yet never caught him. In time, two brothers followed the barking of Satan's dogs to the vampire's grave and struck his bloated corpse with their shovel. Most of the blood he recently consumed burst from his belly. To destroy the creature, the brothers cut out its heart and set the remains on fire. Such vampiric graves are often described as being filled with blood and gore. And William of Newburgh rectified his recounting of folk belief with Christian values by claiming that Satan had reanimated the corpses and caused all of this trouble. Even after William's time, folk tradition dictated that the evil dead should be buried face down or pinned with a stake to prevent them from walking. Of course, people were inclined to believe that criminals would return from the dead to plague the living. Yet, they could include humble and hard-working men. In the early 14th century, a shepherd named Myslata died in the Bohemian village of Blau. After his death, Myslata became a vampire, terrorizing his home village each night. Amazingly, he could kill a person only by calling out their name, which caused the person to die within 8 days. When the peasants pushed a stake through Myslata's heart, he mocked them and said he would use the stake to ward off dogs. After that, a professional executioner and his attendants moved the vampire out of the village. Myslata screamed and thrashed his limbs the whole way out until the men pushed stakes into Myslata's body and pinned him to the ground to make sure that he stayed out this time. So medieval people believed that even a good and godly person could become evil if revived. During the 14th century, the Black Death swept across Eurasia, carrying off 2/3 the population. Europe endured the Black Death towards the end of the 1340s, leaving a morbid and fearful culture behind, always waiting for death's scythe. Overcrowding became a common problem in post-Black Death cemeteries. To free up space for new burials, officials exhumed and stacked bones and skeletons in ossuaries, also called charnel houses. Many such places acquired a great artistic value as the officials arranged bones to produce aesthetically pleasing patterns and ornaments. Observing the bones supposedly encouraged believers to meditate about their mortal state. The remains usually included the inscription, "You are what we were. We are what you shall be." This harkens back to a cherished medieval tale of the 3 living and the 3 dead. In it, 3 wealthy and well-dressed young men ride down a road. They encounter 3 shambling corpses, 1 newly dead, 1 rotting, and 1 skeleton. As in the inscription, the 3 dead warn the 3 young aristocrats to spurn vanity and sin with the words, "You are what we were. You are what we shall be." That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.